Emily Harper knew that feeling better than anyone. She was the housemaid at Reed Hall, a solemn oceanfront estate tucked away on the edge of Cape May, New Jersey. Each morning, Emily woke before dawn, tied her chestnut hair into a neat bun, put on her uniform, and stepped silently into a world that never seemed to notice she was part of it. The man who lived in that house, Nathaniel Reed, was a reclusive billionaire, once a powerful figure in New York's financial world, now hidden away since the death of his wife, Catherine. To the world, he remained poised, polished, and powerful. But to Emily, he was like a marble statue, flawless on the outside, fractured from within. Every day she passed by him, leaving behind steaming cups of coffee, spotless rooms, and carefully arranged spaces. But he never looked at her. To Nathaniel, she was just another element of the house's stillness, a shadow that moved, a ghost that cleaned. But to Emily, he was everything she never dared to dream of. And her love, though unspoken, grew stronger each day, like a small flame smoldering beneath the cold ashes of a haunted home. She didn't know why her heart had chosen this grieving man. Maybe it was because his solitude mirrored her own. Are you ready to feel something real? Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another emotional love story like this one. Let's begin. Silence had become a habit for Emily, part of her breath, her being. She didn't speak much. She didn't laugh. She made no sound when walking across the old wooden floors. Silence was her invisible cloak, something she wore daily, not just to protect herself, but to remain unseen. At 5 a.m., when the ocean still slumbered beneath a veil of fog and the waves whispered softly against the cliffs, Emily would rise, straighten her bed in the narrow staff room, tie her hair into a low bun, and slip into a freshly pressed white apron. A crooked mirror hanging on a cracked plaster wall reflected a 20-year-old girl with pale skin and hazel eyes that carried far more exhaustion than her age should allow. Reed Hall slowly awakened, like some ancient beast. The creak of doors, the wind sliding through the window panes, and Emily's light footsteps weaving down long, cold hallways. She knew every groan of the floorboards, every chipped patch of paint on the railings, every blind spot in the lighting. Reed Hall was her world, even if she didn't belong in it. She always began with the library, where the first light of morning painted golden streaks across the wooden floors. Then the office, soaked in the scent of old leather, aged oak, and lingering whiskey. And finally the master bedroom, always too still, too silent, like a mausoleum. She cleaned that room as though touching someone else's grief, gently, reverently, respectfully. Half the bed was never disturbed, as if Catherine might return at any moment. When preparing coffee, Emily always used the same pale blue porcelain cup, the one that had once belonged to Catherine. No one had to tell her. Nathaniel kept everything the same. It wasn't just sorrow, it was devotion. She made his coffee dark, strong, unsweetened, just as he liked it. Placing the cup on the small side table beside his leather armchair near the window, where he always sat to look at the garden, she made no sound. Each motion was practiced, ritualized, like sacred ceremony. But while her hands remained silent, her eyes would steal glances. Nathaniel Reed sat there each morning, his gray eyes like fog over the sea. His face gave away nothing, but Emily could feel the storms inside him, like waves crashing beneath a calm surface. And it was that silence, that wordless loneliness, that made her fall deeper in love with him each day. He had never touched her, never said anything beyond a faint nod. But to Emily, he was the quiet world she chose to remain in. She existed in the spaces between glances. She lived in the moments after he looked away. She left behind the soft scent of lavender, a fragrance that passed through a room and faded quickly, like her very presence. She loved him without being loved in return. But that didn't make her love any less real. His name was Nathaniel Reed. At 42, he commanded a financial empire that stretched from Boston to New York. In the headlines, he was the master strategist, Wall Street's invincible, the golden man of the century. But none of those titles could save him from a single truth. Catherine, the woman he had loved more than life itself, was gone. 3 years ago, a car crash had taken her from him, And Nathaniel had never been the same. He withdrew from social circles, turned down interviews, abandoned the glittering galas that once filled his calendar. Reed Hall became his fortress, a sanctuary and a prison built of grief. Each morning, he sat motionless in the leather armchair by the window, gripping a cup of coffee he never finished, staring into the garden where Catherine had once planted white roses. Now overgrown and withering, the garden mirrored his soul, something once full of color, now faded and left to decay. Emily sometimes heard him speaking in his office, murmuring to old photographs, his voice breaking with the weight of unsaid goodbyes. But he never cried in front of others. To the world he remained stone. Only behind half-open doors did Emily witness him curled in the dark, clutching a wedding photo to his chest like an orphaned child. Nathaniel wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold by nature, but grief had armored him. He lived by obligation, survived by routine, but inside was a hollow that echoed with the name of the woman he had lost. Emily saw it, the thing no one else cared to see. She didn't fully understand his pain, but she listened to it gently, the way only another lonely heart could. And even if he never knew what her presence meant to Emily, Nathaniel was more than a successful man, more than a public figure once envied by all. He was proof that loss could turn a person into a ghost while they were still alive. How many times had Emily told herself, watching him from afar would be enough? How many nights had she crushed the hope of being held in his arms, of hearing him whisper her name? But hearts were not built to love in silence forever. Some emotions, if not spoken, rot inside the ribcage. Emily understood this on a cold autumn night, as the ocean howled beyond her window and the estate fell silent, like the world had forgotten how to knock. She sat on her narrow bed, a soft amber light casting shadows over the blank page before her. Her hands trembled, as if each word she wrote was tearing a piece from her soul. Dear Nathaniel, I know you don't see me. Perhaps it's better that way. I'm just the woman who dusts your memories every day. But if, even for a second, you felt a warmth lingering behind, I want you to know it came from my heart. She wrote as though falling freely, no pause for caution. The words poured out like blood from a wound. Honest, fragile, painfully beautiful. I see you when you think no one's watching. I hear you whisper Catherine's name in the night. I see how you place your hand over her photo like you're afraid she'll disappear. And I wish I could be that hand, to be the one beside you when you're hurting most. Tears dropped onto the page, smudging a few lines. Emily didn't wipe them away. She let the pain soak in, let the letter become a part of her. I know I'm just a maid. I know I shouldn't dream, but I still do. I dream of touching you, of calling your name not as a servant, but as someone who loves you. The letter wasn't meant to be sent. It was a confession Emily wrote to keep from exploding in silence. She folded it carefully, tucked it inside an old book, and placed it in the corner of her wardrobe. She swore it would never see daylight, but fate never asked permission before intervening. One Friday morning, while cleaning the master bedroom, Emily clumsily dropped her cleaning bag. Everything scattered across the marble floor: rags, bottles, a small notebook, and the letter. The letter slid from the book and fluttered to the floor, landing softly near the doorway, just as footsteps echoed down the hall. Emily didn't need to look up. She knew that gait, that sound. Nathaniel stood there, a shadow framed by the morning light, watching the letter like it was a ghost from his past. Emily felt the blood drain from her face, her limbs turning to ice. She dropped to her knees, frantically gathering her things. But a larger, steadier hand had already picked up the letter. You dropped this? Nathaniel's voice was neutral, but something in his eyes made it hard for her to breathe. It's just a shopping list, sir. She lied, voice barely audible. He didn't respond, just looked at the letter, then at her, before calmly folding it and sliding it into the inner pocket of his blazer. Finish your work, Emily. It was the first time he had said her name, and in that moment she knew nothing would ever be the same again. All that day, Emily moved through the halls like a ghost trapped in a waking nightmare. Every step echoed with dread. She worked mechanically, cleaning, serving, answering briefly, But in her mind, only one question played on repeat. Has he read it? What is he thinking? She couldn't eat. Sleep never came. That night, she curled beneath her thin blanket, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak in the hallway as if judgment was approaching with quiet footsteps. By morning, she rose as usual, but her hands trembled as she carried the coffee tray. The pale blue cup clinked softly against its saucer, a sound so faint, yet enough to make her chest tighten. The door to the study was slightly ajar. Emily paused, took a deep breath, and, "Come in, Emily." His voice came from within, low, steady, and different. There was something warmer in the way he said her name. She stepped inside, eyes downcast as always. He sat in his usual place, but instead of staring out at the garden, his gaze met hers. Direct, unblinking, long. "Good morning, sir," she whispered. "Nathaniel." He corrected her, his voice soft yet resolute. She froze. He had never asked her to use his first name, and he had never looked at her like this, like he was truly seeing her for the first time. I shouldn't have written those things," she stammered, wringing her hands. "I just needed to let it out, so I could breathe. I didn't think you would." "I read it," Nathaniel cut in, his tone no longer distant, no longer cold. Silence filled the room again, broken only by the whisper of wind teasing the curtains. He stood and stepped closer. Not too close, but enough that she could feel his presence. "Do you know I haven't felt anything for 3 years?" he asked quietly. "Since Catherine died, I stopped feeling pain, joy, anything. But reading what you wrote, I felt something I thought was long buried." Emily looked up, daring to meet his gray eyes, and in them she saw not just sorrow, but a flicker of uncertainty, of awakening. "I don't expect anything," she said, tears welling. "I know I'm just a maid. I have no right to dream like that." He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "you are not just the maid. You are the first person who's seen me, really seen me, since it all ended." The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was the delicate stillness before a storm. Nathaniel took another step forward, and for the first time he reached out, not to command, but to gently touch her cheek, where a single tear was tracing a quiet path downward. "Emily." He whispered her name, like he was learning how to speak it for the first time. She closed her eyes, leaned slightly into his touch. Just a small gesture, but to her it was a miracle, and to him, it was the first door out of the darkness he'd lived in for far too long. After that morning, neither of them spoke about the letter. No promises, no explanations. But something had changed, quietly, softly, like rain soaking into the earth. No words were needed. They both felt it. Something had begun. Emily went about her duties as usual, but now whenever she entered a room, Nathaniel's gaze no longer lingered on the window. It found her. Every morning, when she placed his coffee on the table, his hand would brush hers and linger for just 1 second longer than necessary. They didn't kiss in the parlor. They didn't hold hands in the daylight. But love slipped into the spaces between silence, in their glances, in the shorter distance between them, in the breath they shared while passing each other in the library at night. One evening, under the soft amber hallway light, they crossed paths. Nathaniel stopped. Without a word, he reached out and brushed a stray hair from Emily's forehead. She didn't move, barely breathed, as if afraid the moment would vanish if she did. Then on another night, when the ocean wind crept through a half-closed window and rustled the pages of an open book, Emily walked into the library like always, and found him already there, waiting. No greeting, no permission. He stepped forward, pulled her gently into him, and kissed her. Slowly, tenderly, as if he were kissing a pain he had carried for far too long. Emily didn't resist. She only closed her eyes and let the moment take her. It wasn't a rushed kiss. It wasn't desperate, but something in it made her tremble. For in that kiss, she was no longer a maid. She was a woman, desired, seen, and loved. After that night, they were no longer strangers under the same roof. They kept their distance in daylight, played their roles with precision. But once night fell, Reed Hall became the keeper of their secrets. A stolen touch behind a closed door, a whispered word in the empty hallway, a soft breath exchanged in the quiet of a midnight kitchen. Emily knew what they had didn't have a name. It wasn't declared love. It wasn't a defined relationship. But in her heart, he was the only thing that made the world feel real. And if it was wrong, then she would choose that mistake 1,000 times over. What's hidden in the dark will always find its way to the light. Emily never found out who took the photo. Maybe it was a bored gardener, maybe a nosy stranger with a long lens. But the image, capturing the exact moment she and Nathaniel kissed in the West Garden, once Catherine's favorite corner, became a ticking bomb. 3 days later, the headlines exploded online. Widowed billionaire Nathaniel Reed, rumored to be romantically involved with young housemaid. The photo was blurry, but clear enough for the world to speculate. Emily froze when she saw it on Linda, the head cook's phone. Linda stared at her, stunned. "Emily, is this real?" From that moment on, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Whispers followed her into every room. She seduced him. Must be for the money. She played innocent, but look at her. Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, stopped her outside the library with a cold stare. "I thought you knew your place, Emily. Clearly I was wrong." Emily said nothing. She didn't defend herself. She just pressed her lips together, lowered her head, and kept walking. But each step grew heavier. Reed Hall, once a shelter for her silent love, had become suffocating. Nathaniel tried to protect her. He issued a house-wide warning: no gossip, no assumptions. He promised to manage the press. But Emily knew, in the eyes of the world, someone like her would always be the one to lose. One night, after wiping down the kitchen counters, she stood at the window for a long time, staring into the garden where they had once kissed. She asked herself, "Have I gone too far? Am I destroying him just by being near?" The answer didn't come from anyone else, but from the aching silence in her own heart. Even if the love was real, she knew her place in this world was never meant beside someone like Nathaniel. And so, because she loved him, she chose to leave. No goodbyes, no letters, no tears. Just one ordinary morning, Emily walked away from Reed Hall with an old suitcase, a few pieces of clothing, and a heart that would never be whole again. She had once been the invisible shadow no one noticed. Now she returned to the shadows, this time to disappear from his world completely. Emily left Reed Hall on a morning just like any other. Gray skies, calm sea, cold wind. But inside her, everything had changed. She rented a small room above an old bakery on the outskirts of Cape May. The space was barely large enough for a single bed, a wobbly wooden table, and a wardrobe that creaked each time it opened. There was no scent of fresh coffee, no rose garden, no elegant silence, only street noise and the smell of burnt bread from below. She found work at a local diner. She cleaned tables, washed dishes, worked long hours for meager pay. She lived frugally, dry bread for meals, layered sweaters at night when the heater broke. But she didn't complain. She didn't curse the world. She simply existed, like a tree ripped from familiar soil, trying to root itself in foreign ground, unsure if it would survive. Then one day her body betrayed the silence she had buried her heart in. Dizziness, nausea, missed cycles. And then, the truth, spelled out clearly on a cheap pregnancy test in a dim bathroom. She was pregnant, Nathaniel's child. Emily sank to the floor, arms folded over the new fragile life inside her. No tears fell, but her soul cracked wide open. For the first time in her lonely world, she was no longer one. She was two. She didn't call him, didn't write, didn't go back. He doesn't need to know, and this child doesn't need to grow up as a shadow in his world, she told herself. From that day on, Emily worked harder. Every coin was saved for the future. She began knitting small sweaters, tiny white ones, blue ones, imperfect in shape but made with care. At night, she would place a hand on her belly and whisper, "I'm sorry the world you're entering isn't perfect, but I promise to do everything I can, even if I have to do it alone." She no longer dreamed of library kisses or tender glances through window light. But deep down, she still loved Nathaniel. Not as a lover, but as the father of the life she now carried. The last remnant of a love that once was real. That afternoon, the sky finally gave in to tears it had held back all summer. Gray clouds churned, wind rose from the sea, and then the rain came. Heavy, cold, relentless. Emily had just finished her shift, clutching a thin coat to her chest, hurrying back to her small, rented room. Raindrops seeped through fabric, into her hair, into every memory she was trying to forget. She didn't notice the man standing across the street until she heard her name. Emily! She froze. That voice. She had heard it in 100 dreams, imagined it in 1,000 lonely nights. But no, this couldn't be. She turned, and he was there, drenched in rain. Nathaniel Reed, the man who had once been everything, stood staring at her like the world had just breathed again. His storm gray eyes shimmered with water, but this time it wasn't sorrow, it was hope. He stepped forward. Rain lashed his face, but he didn't blink. She didn't back away. She didn't run. She simply stood there, letting fate pour down on them once more. I've been looking for you for 3 months, he said, voice shaking. Everywhere. I didn't know you had taken everything with you. She gently placed her hand over the swell beneath her sweater. His gaze softened, stunned, then tender, then full of love. That's why I didn't tell you, she whispered. I didn't want you to come back out of duty. He shook his head, stepping closer. It's not duty. It's because I can't live another day without seeing you, without saying this. And then he dropped to his knees right there in a puddle on a quiet street in the cold rain. Emily Harper, I love you. I've loved you even before I understood it. You're not just a maid. You're the woman who brought me back to life. You're not just the maid. You are the miracle I never thought I deserved. But if you'll let me, I want to spend every storm, every sunrise with you. Forever. She stood frozen, her heart squeezed painfully. All the loneliness, hurt, and silent nights washed down her cheeks like the rain from the sky. She sank to her knees too, wrapping her arms around his face. I dreamed of this moment, she whispered. But in the dream, you never found me. Then let me rewrite the dream, he whispered back, pressing his lips softly to her forehead. The rain still fell, but now it was only the backdrop to a moment time would never undo. Reed Hall hadn't changed much in the months since she left. The iron gate still groaned when it opened. The maple trees still stretched their old limbs like waving hands. The sea still whispered in the distance as if it had never stopped missing her. But inside Emily, everything was different. She no longer entered through the servant's path. This time she walked beside Nathaniel, hand in hand through the front door, like someone returning not to a job, but to a place her heart had always belonged. Mrs. Whitmore, the head housekeeper, was the first to greet them. Her face froze for a moment upon seeing Emily. But this time, there was no disdain. Just a slow nod, like she had known this moment was inevitable. Emily stepped into the main hall, the line that once divided her from his world, with a calm heartbeat. Everything felt hauntingly familiar. The green rug beneath her feet, the scent of old books from the library, the quiet breath of walls that remembered everything. Nathaniel gently squeezed her hand. No words, just certainty. Your old room's still there, he said softly, but you won't be needing it anymore. Emily smiled, and for the first time in months, it wasn't forced, it wasn't guarded, it was real. She stood in the living room, the room that had once felt forbidden, and realized she was no longer a shadow passing through his life. She was the light he had chosen to keep. That afternoon, she walked through the West Garden, the place where one kiss had forever changed her life. The rose bushes Catherine once planted were blooming again. Maybe Nathaniel had cared for them. Maybe spring was finally arriving. She knelt down, placed a hand on her round belly, and whispered, "Welcome home, little one. Not to the house of stone and walls, but to a true home, one filled with love, forgiveness, and new beginnings." The wedding took place in the West Garden of Reed Hall, where everything had once begun. There were no crowds, just a few familiar faces, candlelight and white roses blooming after years of silence. Emily wore an ivory dress sewn by Linda, the head cook. Nathaniel wore his father's old suit, not for thrift, but for sentiment. They wanted the day to reflect the way their love began. Quiet, unadorned, but real. As the music began, Emily walked across the grass. No bouquet, no tears, just calm. Nathaniel stood beneath the flower arch, his eyes soft as the autumn sea. No one spoke of the past. No one mentioned Catherine. But in Emily's heart, she whispered gratitude to the woman who once held his love. Because without the loss, they might never have found each other. "Do you take him?" the officiant asked. "I do," she replied with no hesitation. It wasn't just a promise to Nathaniel. It was a promise to herself, the woman who had once lived in the shadows, now standing fully in the light. 3 months later, a baby girl was born on a foggy morning. Nathaniel named her Hope. She had her father's stormy gray eyes and her mother's soft curved smile. When her first cry echoed through the master bedroom, once a chamber of grief, Emily felt as though she had been born again. Reed Hall was no longer a mausoleum of memories. It had become a home, with laughter, tiny hands grabbing shirts, and slow breakfasts where no one needed to pretend. Some nights, Emily stood by the library window, cradling her daughter. Outside, the west garden swayed gently, roses blooming again, just like her heart. Nathaniel would come up behind her and wrap his arms around her shoulders. "We spent years trying to find each other," he whispered, "but what matters is, you stayed." She leaned into him, looking down at the sleeping child in her arms, and smiled. "No," she said softly, "you found me." And at last, they were no longer two lonely souls drifting in the shadows of yesterday. They were three, together, building a home from love, loss, and the courage to begin again. And that was the story of a silent love that refused to fade. From a maid no one noticed, to the woman who returned through the front door with a wedding dress and a baby in her arms, Emily showed us that real love doesn't need noise, just truth. And Nathaniel, the man trapped in the past, finally chose to live again. Not all love starts with promises. Some begin with a glance, a letter, a name spoken softly. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If you've ever loved in silence or waited for someone to find you, drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs a little hope. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and stay in love.